Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Ajay Shah from AS Food Technology, Pty Limited. It's a company based in Australia. My background is I'm actually a food technologist, but prior to that, I have studied a double degree in biology and chemistry. So I have qualifications in Higher National Diploma in Applied Biology, bachelor's double degree in biology and chemistry, followed that with master's in food science from Leeds University in UK, and also a PhD from the same university. And then my background was I was an academic for a very long time, and then went into industry. For the past 20 years, I've been working in the Australian food industry, and in the same process, whilst I was actually working in the food industry, I also started divulging into other areas such as cosmetics. So I'm now one of the main cosmetic auditors in Australia for good manufacturing practices. So today's presentation is actually on good manufacturing practices cosmetics auditing according to the standard ISO 22716 2007. Today's presentation, I'll be talking about the main key points will be early uses, definition of cosmetics, birth of a global standard, referring to ISO 22716, the origins of the global standard. Then I will move on to cosmetics GMP, which stands for good manufacturing practice, ISO 22716 and international regulations. So I'll be touching on that. I will also be touching on quality management systems associated with GMP cosmetics auditing. The components of ISO 22716. I will also talk about the 36 definitions. I won't be going into depth on every single definition. I'll just select a few and I'll talk to you about a few of those definitions. Then I will move into cosmetics GMP core elements. There are 5 core elements: personnel, premises and equipment, production, quality control, and then quality systems. I will then finish off with the GMP activities in ISO 22716 2007 standard, and then finally concluding from there on. So, yep, concluding remarks. Okay. Now, as we all know, cosmetics has been utilized for a very long time. And if you look at the slide in front of you, you will notice that cosmetics has been used 3,500 years BC. The Romans and the ancient Egyptians used cosmetics, particularly if you look at the photographs of ancient Egyptian women, you could see eyeshadows, and what they also use is a black powdery substance called kohl. Often this substance contained poisonous mercury and lead. And then in the 13th century, we got alcohol-based perfumes, which were actually introduced into Europe from the Middle East by the Crusaders. Moving on into the 16th century, this is the Elizabethan era. Elizabethan nobilities used mercuric sulfide or white lead for skin peeling, whitening to give appearance of pale skin. And in the 17th century, new perfumes developed in France by blending of ingredients. By mid-19th century, you once saw widespread usage around the world. I mean, when you look at it today, you know, cosmetics are widely used globally, both by male and females. You know, females in particular. I mean, when you talk about males, you know, you've got the aftershaves, you've got the lotions, the shaving balm. All these things are classified as cosmetics. I will now move on to the next slide, which is looking at a definition of a cosmetic product. Now, a cosmetic product means any substance or mixture intended to be placed in contact with external parts of the human body, which is the epidermis. Basically, epidermis is the skin, hair system, nails, etc., or with the teeth and the mucous membranes of the oral cavity, with a view exclusively or mainly to cleaning them, perfuming them, changing their appearance, protecting them, keeping them in good condition, or correcting body odors. Now, I also wanted to let you know that sunscreens in European countries is regarded as a cosmetic, whereas in Australia it's classified as a therapeutic product, because in Australia the ozone layer is very thin, and you know, we get a lot of UV rays, so we have to protect ourselves. So it's classed as a therapeutic product rather than a cosmetic product. I will now move to talking about global cosmetic product safety. Now, as we all know, the safety of cosmetic products is an issue on the minds of manufacturers, suppliers, and regulators alike. Now, there are numerous regional and international standards that have been created over the years in order to sort of enhance the quality and safety of cosmetic products globally. So, you know, virtually every country had their own standard, just so that they had some sort of a safety measure for consumers. I will be talking a little bit more about how the birth of the global standard occurred. Now, as you all know, consumers are becoming more and more concerned about safety of the cosmetic products they are using. There are fears of allergies and dermatitis, which are caused by tainted or poisoned cosmetics that have been ever present in recent years. There are certain ingredients used in cosmetics, such as fragrances and preservatives, which can trigger allergic reactions in people. You know, it's a very some people have very sensitive skin, so one has to be mindful about that. There are incidents such as these that have always impacted the public, and so have forced regulators to take action to ensure consumer safety. The other thing is the recent growth of extended and complex supply chains occurring in combination with the lack of proper control and oversight have made concerns over quality and safety even more serious. Now, the introduction of the ISO 22716 standard marks a major step in realization globally recognized standard for cosmetic product safety. This standard was actually prepared by the ISO Technical Committee 217 working group between 2002 and 2006. Now, the final document was actually published in November 2007. So from there on, it was known as ISO 22716:2007. So the result is an international auditable standard that specifies the requirements for cosmetic product safety management system by incorporating the elements of good manufacturing practices and risk assessment in combination with a comprehensive quality management system. I will just touch on the origins of the global standards. So if you look at this slide, you'll notice that in 1938, GMP, which stands for Good Manufacturing Practice, was enforced by the Food and Drug Administration in the United States as a result of 1938 Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act. In 1950s, GMP established for pharmaceutical industry in both United States and Europe. In 1976 was the establishment of European Cosmetic Regulations 76/768 EWG. This was then followed in 1994 with the publication of the European Guidelines on Cosmetic GMP, known as COLIPA. In 2002, the ISO Working Group 6 was activated to develop a GMP guideline standard for cosmetics. And in 2003, Asian Guidelines for Cosmetic GMP was published in compliance with provisions of the Asian Cosmetic Directive. In 2007, this is the introduction of the ISO 22716 on the GMP for cosmetic products. This is the standard which is now utilized globally at present. In 2009, we saw regulation EC 1223/2009 on cosmetic product consumer safety, which was passed by the European Parliament, and this was followed in 2011 with reference to ISO 22716/2007 as a harmonized standard for GMP in the European Union. So, the countries of the European Union basically harmonize this standard. So if you wanted to actually sell products, say, for example, from Australia into Europe, then you have to follow the ISO 22716 standard. If you don't have that, you virtually cannot sell products. And the same applies to other countries such as China, Japan. So just to reiterate that. Now, I will move to talking about cosmetic GMP in a little bit more detail. Now, the ISO 22716 has direct links to many other cosmetic regulations around the world, as I mentioned just about a minute ago. Regulations in several countries and regions have adopted this particular standard, referring to ISO 22716, effectively replacing existing guidance and standards, their own guidance and standards. ISO 22716 provides a comprehensive approach for a quality management system for those engaged in manufacturing, packaging, testing, storage, and transportation of cosmetic finished products. ISO 22716 gives guidance for production, control, storage, and shipment of cosmetic products. It deals with all aspects of the supply chain of cosmetic products. What it doesn't cover is the quality aspects of what it covers is the quality aspects of the products, but it does not cover things like safety aspects of the personnel engaged in the plant. It doesn't cover aspects of protection of the environment. It is not applicable to research and development activities, and also it's not applicable for distribution of finished products. I will now move over to speaking about ISO 22716 and the international regulations. Now, the content of this particular standard, the ISO 22716, Guidelines on Good Manufacturing practices for cosmetic products has been approved and accepted by a number of regulatory bodies around the world. Again, there has been international cooperation on cosmetics regulations, known as ICCR, a joint effort by United States of America, the European Union, Japan, and Canada. All of them agreed in their July 2008 meeting to implement ISO 22716 in their respective regions wherever possible. Now, I will be talking about quality management. I will break it down into the manufacturing responsibility, quality management systems, and documentation. So, firstly, cosmetic products must be manufactured in such a way as to ensure that they are fit for their intended use and do not place consumers at risk due to inadequate safety or quality. This is very important. Secondly, the responsibility. Again, senior management are responsible within the organization. So the attainment of this quality objective is the responsibility of senior management and requires participation and commitment by staff at all levels across all departments within the company if you wanted to maintain this particular standard. Again, it's a comprehensively designed standard. So to effectively achieve this quality objective, there must be a comprehensively designed and correctly implemented quality management system in place. Quality management system ensures that manufacturers of a cosmetic product is consistent. I will now be moving to talk about the components of ISO 22716. Now, the first point I want to make is ISO 22716 deals with all aspects of the supply chain of cosmetic products, from delivery of raw materials and components until the final finished product shipment to the consumer. ISO 22716 also gives guidelines for the production, control, storage, and shipment of cosmetic products. These guidelines cover quality and safety aspects of the product. And finally, in an effort to reach and maintain consistency and encourage the use of common terminology, ISO 22716 Terms and Definitions section contains a set of 36 definitions that are specific to the application of this particular standard. I'm just going to show you the definitions, and I will be running through some of the definitions because I don't have time to cover every single definition in detail. So I will pick up a few and just give you the terminology and definitions of the words in front of you. Firstly, acceptance criteria. This is known as the numerical limits or ranges or other suitable measures for acceptance of test results. Batch number. This is very important in the cosmetic industry because distinctive combination of numbers, letters, and or symbols which specifically identifies a batch. Usually they carry the batch from raw materials to the finished products. So then it's easy to trace. If there was an issue, you can actually identify that particular product through the batch number. Bulk product. This is any product which has completed manufacturing stages up to, but not including, final packaging. I want to talk about change control, international organization and responsibilities relative to any planned change of one or several activities covered by good manufacturing practices in order to ensure that all the manufactured, packaged, controlled and stored products correspond to the defined acceptance criteria. There is one definition: contract acceptor. That is a person, a company or external organization carrying out an operation on behalf of another person, company or organization. So that's a definition of a contract acceptor. Deviation, again, this is an international organization and responsibilities relative to the authorization to deviate from specified requirements due to a planned or unplanned, and in any case, temporary situation concerning one or several activities covered by the good manufacturing practices. In process control, these are actually defined as controls performed during production in order to monitor and, if appropriate, to adjust the process to ensure that the product meets the defined acceptance criteria. Now, just as a matter of interest, this could be, you might have a pH meter where you can actually monitor the pH of the component. Now, if the pH is too high or pH is too low, they will take a sample, go to the laboratory, check it, and they can then adjust to the right pH, which is sort of similar pH to the skin of the body. So that's in process control. I will also touch base on recall. You've probably heard about recall. It's very big in the food industry. Recall is a decision made by a company to call back a product batch that has been put on the market. That happens if there is a problem with that particular product. Reprocessing, the definition is retreatment of all or part of a batch of finished product or bulk product of an acceptable quality from a defined stage of production so that its quality may be rendered acceptable by one or more additional operations. So reprocessing is, in other words, a rework. So, something that you can actually rework to utilize that product to manufacture something else. So that is just a few definitions that I've covered. I will now move to the core elements. Now, cosmetics GMP has 5 core elements. We look at personnel. We'll also be looking at premises and equipment. We also look at things like production. When you're actually auditing, these are the main 5 core elements that we look at, and the quality control is the actual quality management system of the actual cosmetics good manufacturing practices, as well as quality control. So the 5 sections on the slide basically make up the core elements of cosmetics GMP. Firstly, I'll be looking at personnel. I'll be looking at, within the personnel, the organization. Now, quality unit of an organization needs to be independent in its decision-making process from the manufacturing operations unit. Again, this can be established via organizational charts, which needs to be version controlled documents, and these also must be signed and dated by senior management. It is very important. Again, key responsibilities of key personnel, including representatives of the quality unit, should be documented in their job description. So these are things that one needs to look at if you're auditing these systems. The other thing that I would like to look at is training is very, very important. In addition to training on GMP, personnel should receive training in aspects of the company's quality management systems. That is, for example, policies, standard operating procedures, work instructions, etc., relevant to their particular role and the duties assigned to them. So training records should be kept, and as part of the audit, one has to look at the training records to make sure that people working in the cosmetic sector are all fully trained, because hygiene is very important. So, you know, one has to be trained in hygiene. So I'm just going to be touching on hygiene. With respect to personnel hygiene, the requirements should be documented in a procedure under the company's quality management system, and should include a specific requirement for hands to be washed prior to entry into the production area. So as auditors, we have to sort of make sure that people coming from breaks are actually washing their hands, applying alcohol gel sanitizers before going to their workstations. So, you know, in this particular slide, you can see that, you know, for example, you can say the lady's probably not got the right attire. You know, it should, her hands and everything should be covered. The fan is in close proximity to that lipstick. So anything, if the area is not clean, anything can actually blow onto the final product. You know, that's foreign material onto the lipstick. So that's just a slide just to show you that, you know, people have to wear the right attire for the job. I will now touch onto premises and equipment. Proper design. Manufacturers should consider the design and layout and finish of manufacturing, filling and packaging areas with a view to ensuring protection of the product, efficient cleaning and maintenance, and minimizing the risk of any mix-up of products, raw materials, and packaging materials. Light fittings in the manufacturing areas should ensure containment of any debris from potential breakage, because, you know, one of the things that as auditors we should look at, all the lights and fittings are covered, so in the event, so that if there is a breakage of the light, you know, fragments don't appear in, say, lotions or whatever, and then that can potentially injure the consumers. Ventilation of the premises should be reviewed, considering the nature of the, you know, if you're dealing with powdered substances and any volatile fragrances, like, if you know, perfumes are all volatile. So people working in that environment, you know, one has to be to ensure that there is ample ventilation. Cleaning and sanitation is the other one. Proper cleaning and sanitization are important to avoid occurrence of mix-ups and cross-contamination. One of the other things I wanted to touch base on was maintenance and calibration. So scheduled maintenance of premises and equipment and frequent calibration of monitoring devices have to be organized in order to perform tasks according to defined and preset parameters of manufacturing, packaging, and storage. Calibration, frequent calibration of monitoring devices have to be organized in the facilities in order to perform tasks. So that these are important points to note. I will now move into a section on production. This is quite a detailed section, so I will break it down into materials management. So, you know, one has to look at purchasing of materials, receival of materials, identification, and the status. So when the product comes in, it's always put in quarantine. It then either, once it comes with a certificate of analysis, it's then released, or if they have a laboratory on site, the sample will then be taken and sent to the lab. The lab will then give approval to release the product, which will then go into storage and then re-evaluated if on storage, if it's past this expiry date, that goes back to the be retested just to make sure that that particular sample of raw material is still good to use even past the expiry date. Sometimes companies actually send samples back to the suppliers so that they can actually test the product and verify and validate that, yeah, it's all good. So a new batch of raw material is a new expiry date is supplied. So the company should engage with suppliers of key raw materials with a view to obtaining certificate of analysis, known as CFAs, for each batch of raw materials supplied. Specifications of raw materials, including water and packaging materials, should be documented, including defined acceptance criteria relevant to the quality of finished products. Now, water is important because the quality of water for cosmetics is very, very important. So, most of the water is either purchased or they have facility to actually sanitize the water using UV systems in place. And again, these UV systems need to be maintained and checked by external contractors. So all these things are critical. Now, in terms of manufacturing operations, documentation, startup checks, in-process checks, all these sort of things are very important. And as auditors, we have to make sure that when we are actually auditing these systems, we check all those things. So detailed instructions for cleaning, checking, and approval of production areas should be fully documented in procedures under the company's quality management system. One needs to check for cleanliness of rooms or equipment, which should be conducted by a second independent person and not the person who has conducted the cleaning operation. So, somebody has to sort of check and review that it's all been done properly. Manufacturing operations should be carried out according to manufacturing documentation with detailed instructions regarding the type of equipment used for that particular production of that particular batch, the product formulation, for example, addition of raw materials, the temperature, if temperature is a critical factor, the speed, if you're using mixers, what speed you have to mix. You don't want to mix it at very high viscosity, high mixing speeds, because that can actually have an impact on the final product. So mixing times are also very critical when you're actually formulating products. So there are a lot of factors, and all this needs to be documented on the production records or batch control sheets, as they are known. In terms of documentation, startup checks, comprehensive documentation should be maintained for each batch. In-process control checks, weight requirements for finished products, if applicable, to be specified. Critical steps such as actual temperatures reached, heating times, speeds, and mixing times. I think I've already mentioned all that. Equipment cleaning operations, etc. Again, this needs to be documented so that when you're actually using the same equipment for another batch prior to operating, you just want to make sure that everything is fully cleaned and before you start the operation. Okay, packaging controls. Packaging materials should be closed and sealed during storage to prevent contaminations, and to ensure packaging has not been damaged. So once the product, like you've actually taken enough packaging, you tie the knot, put everything back in the bag and seal it, because you want to keep all your packaging intact without any dust, etc. So appropriate arrangements should be implemented for tracking the usage of packaging materials. This should be controlled one has to avoid errors related to packaging. For example, wrong product filled in the wrong container. So it's really important that on the bed sheet that people have ticked that the right containers are actually utilized. People make a lot of mistakes in industry, labeling mistakes. For example, they use containers, might be the same container, but the labels, they might apply a wrong label, print errors, ineffective reconciliation. So these are some of the things that the auditors need to look at when they're actually auditing cosmetic systems. We then move into storage. It's important that clean and well organized storage for raw materials, bulk materials. Again, it's got the right status. If it's awaiting control, accepted, refused, one has to look at the status before using that particular material, and all the status is actually maintained by QA, quality assurance personnel. So sampling of raw materials is carried out in a designated area and protected if necessary. There is obviously a physical separation between refused, recalled, or returned products. Again, ongoing monitoring of storage conditions, for example, temperature, humidity, etc., is important depending on the type of material you're using for cosmetics. For some products, you may not need temperature and humidity, but for others, one needs temperature controlled and humidity because these can be critical factors for your raw materials for the final finished products as well. I will now move into the quality control area. Sampling is very important. This is generally taken by trained staff using a defined method for sampling, defining equipment they need to use, quantity to sample. So it's really important. So identification of samples, including batch numbers and date of sampling, are critical. So when you take samples, you make sure that you take note of all that. Again, testing of materials and finished products should be conducted and documented as appropriate. So I think, it's good to make sure that all the testing that is conducted is actually all documented. The other thing I want to mention is specifications are really important. So again, this needs to be available for each finished products. Out of specification, if something is out of spec, one needs to conduct full investigation. So when confronted by an out of spec result, the first reflex should be under no circumstances be to repeat the analysis. Approach to conduct laboratory investigation first. Investigation, this is then followed by investigation of the manufacturing process. If laboratory investigations have found that there is no issues from the lab side, like their testing methods and all that is all accurate, you then conduct investigations on the manufacturing process. Consideration of possible retest. Once you've gone through all that, then you start consideration of possible retest. So these are some of the things that one needs to look at. And release of the product. All finished products should be controlled in accordance with established test methods and should comply with acceptance criteria. Product release should be carried out by authorized personnel responsible for quality. So in particular, it's usually a quality assurance manager in the company. So they give you the green light for release. So in other areas, it's actually known as positive release. The next area I want to talk about is documentation control. All documents implemented under the company's quality management system should be approved, signed, and dated by authorized personnel before being used. And one also must have a procedure for any change control, and this also should be documented under the company's quality management system. Again, auditors need to check all these documents that they're all current, being applied out on the floor, and also procedures are all current. So arrangements should be in place for prospective evaluation of planned changes and their approval prior to implementation, taking into account updates to any product information file if required, or when or where required. I will touch base on deviations. Again, one needs to have a system in place to deal with deviations occurring anywhere in the supply chain of operations on site. Deviations from specified requirements are permitted if there is sufficient data to justify the decision, and corrective actions shall be taken to prevent recurrence of any deviation. So, you want to make sure that these if there is a deviation, that a similar deviation doesn't recur again and again. So you just want to make sure that you've got proper corrective actions in place to prevent any recurrences. I will now move to complaints. Now, all complaints received to the company are centralized and are actioned by authorized personnel. So complaint investigation and follow-up should include proper steps to prevent recurrence of the defect, checking other batches in order to determine whether they're also affected. Complaints should be reviewed periodically to check for trends or recurrences of a defect. Trends meaning you can look at the trends to find out how you're tracking, how many complaints you had in the last 6 months, to looking at the complaints you had in these 6 months to see if how you're trending. If you're trending if there's a decrease, things are working very well. If there is an increase, things are not working well. So obviously you need to make sure people are trained properly. All those factors come into play. Also, you can check things with a complaint using retention samples, just to make sure if somebody says, the retention sample, there's a separation or something, you can go back to your retention sample from the same batch to make sure that there is no issue. Then you can actually, once you've conducted your investigation, you can then close that complaint off in a proper manner. Recalls, again, authorized personnel coordinates recalls within the organization. These are initiated promptly and also in a timely manner. Notification of appropriate authorities of recalls which could have an impact upon consumer safety. So, the right people, regulators in the industry are also informed about that. Recalled products are identified and stored separately in a secure area while awaiting a decision. The product recall process is periodically evaluated. I find that when I go to sites, people generally check their recall procedure and say, okay, I have actually evaluated it. That's not what I am actually looking for as an auditor. I am actually looking for people conducting a mock recall, just to make sure that people know what to do in the event of a recall occurring, so that if ever there was a recall, everybody knows what their role is. So I think that's important. So a lot of people are not pretty sure about this, and I think this is something, it's a learning curve. I've found consultants shrug shoulders and say, we have actually got a recall procedure. But my question is, have you tested it? And the answer is no. So once a year, people should test your recall procedure by conducting a proper mock recall. Now, internal audit. In order to conduct a proper internal audit, a procedure for internal audit should be documented under the company's quality management system. It's independent and qualified auditors should be on site, and over the period of 1 year, the whole system needs to be audited. So, it's always good to audit systems in little sections rather than doing it all in one big hit, because I think you get more value when you're actually conducting internal audits in small sections, as long as you cover the whole elements. Now, a report and action plan should be, there should be a report and an action plan on any findings by the internal auditor. So any findings, when the external auditor comes on site, they want to make sure that they have actually all been closed off and actioned off correctly. Change control. So this procedure requires to take into account any changes to a validated procedure and to assess whether this changes is minor or critical. In case of minor changes, the procedure remains applicable. In case of critical changes, the procedure will be partially or fully revalidated. And again, all the changes need to be made through change control. Now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about GMP activities included in the ISO 22716-2007 standard. There are 15 elements in the standard: personnel, premises, equipment, packaging and raw materials, production, finished products, QC laboratory, treatment of non-conforming products, waste, subcontracting, deviation, complaints and recalls, change control, internal audit and documentation. And I think in the course of this presentation, I've actually touched base on a number of these, but because I don't have that much time, I just wanted to just let you know that I've covered most of these. In terms of waste, you should have systems in place. How do you actually get rid of the waste from your premises? So you have proper procedures. If you've got hazardous waste, you have to document, who collects it, how is it collected, all that sort of thing. In terms of subcontracting, if you're actually subcontracting some of the products, then again, you should have procedures in place for that as well. Procedures in place for QC laboratory, if you have one on site, proper, just to make sure that all the chemicals and reagents are all current. So auditors should actually walk through the laboratory just to randomly pick reagents to make sure that they've got the right reagents. I have actually noticed that there are reagents sometimes which are outdated. There are pH solutions, buffer solutions, which could be outdated because there is a time limit. pH buffers, once opened, they last 1 to 2 months and then they have to be renewed. So again, you have to just make sure that it's all done. Calibration of equipment in the lab. So there's a lot of things that one needs to address. My concluding remarks for the ISO 22716 standard. Well, it's a comprehensive cosmetic safety management system standard. It is very comprehensive. In essence, it integrates typical requirements for product and process quality GMP requirements. It allows for easy implementation in organizations of all sizes, whether it's a large organization or whether it's a small organization. As long as you implement the 15 elements of the standard and it's all functional, you shouldn't have a problem. It forms an international basis for quality and safety compliance. So if you want to trade on a global level, if you have operated to this standard, you shouldn't have any problems trading on an international level. Again, it fosters legal compliance as adopted by regulators around the world. So, you can actually factor in all the regulations for every country within the standard as well. The other points I wanted to make is it controls and reduces cosmetic product hazards and also promotes continuous improvement throughout the supply chain. And on that note, I would like to say thank you for listening to my presentations. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.